in Megillah, the Krachim walled cities. So thanks to the Chaverim and the Chabura, I do need to go over a couple points. We'll do this as quick as we can so that we can move forward. One is, thanks to Rav Yoel, so he pointed out, if you do travel to Zayan, China, it's definitely a suffix, because it seems to be that it was around approximately the time of Yehoshua. Even if no Jews live there, if you're there for Al Purim, you have to keep. You would have to keep misafik.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And just to clarify, we kind of went back and forth on Yericho. So there are many poskim who do say it is a for sure has a din of a suffix, and the reason is, so there's two issues. Number one is what we call Yericho, the same Yericho. That's one issue. Again, you might know, but that is a suffix in the poskim. And the other one is when Yehoshua entered, as he was entering, we know that he conquered it immediately, wiped out the city, the walls disappeared. So when we say Miyamot Yehoshua, when we go by the days of Yehoshua, does that include during most of his life and tenure in Israel, or does it go by when he entered and for a few days, 7 days, whatever it was, when he entered, there was a walled city? So that is the. Anyways, Lamaisa, it is a suffix, and that's at least according to many poskim. Yeah, I don't know about all poskim, but I do know that. Again, I forget who I saw it, but it's definitely written in poske literature that it's certainly a din of a suffix. Okay, again, that might be a machlokas, like all the cities. Okay, let's move on. Now, what I do want to just point out is. I'm going to just quickly review a couple points that in particular relate to Mevaseret and Ramot. Because it's quite interesting and a lot of different factors. Just as an aside, Mevaseret, I did misspeak. It's a completely separate city to Yerushalayim. It has its own municipality, its own area. So that's not a factor by Mevaseret. Okay, I'm just going to point out that there's.
Defend you defending yourself.
Yeah.
I don't remember you saying that it was.
Okay, I may have said that was one of the possible reasons.
I don't remember you saying. I'm going to stop you from having to defend yourself until you can see proof.
Okay, thank you.
You said that if it's part of Yerushalayim.
If it's part, I don't think you said it is.
Okay. So that was one of the issues. So when it comes to, I just want to point out that there are quite a few number of sfeikos. Again, when you read the Gemara, the Mishnah, many of the Rishonim, there's a lot of factors that are not clear, or that it's a machloket, they're not discussed at all. One of them,
right?
We're going to talk about Ramot and Mevaseret for a few minutes, yeah. So I guess we can talk about either one first, but just point out a number of sfeikos that applies to both to keep in mind. When we say it has to be near or samach to Yerushalayim, so we're going to see among the poskim, does it mean it needs to be near all of Yerushalayim or only the original walled city of Yerushalayim? In other words, we assume the original walled city of Yerushalayim is approximately what we have the Ir Atikah, or very close to it. And does it need to be anywhere that's visible to the edge of what we call nowadays Yishuv Eretz Yerushalayim, or the original walled city? So there were many poskim originally who were choshesh for that, the walled city. Obviously, as long as Yerushalayim kept growing, everybody agrees Yerushalayim, as long as it's continuous to the walled city, then the new expanding Yerushalayim, everybody agree would keep Tedvav. The question is, when you say you have an extra, let's say 2,000 amos we mentioned, so then does that 2,000 amos go from the edge of the new city, or does it go from the original city, and you would get no more than 141 amos, like Hilchos Eruvei Tchumin? So that's one question. In other words, another question is, do you go by 2,000 amos from the edge of the house, the last house, or do you go by the Eruv? So Rav Eliashiv, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, Rav Masas, they said you can go by the edge of the Eruv, which adds a lot. Rav Asher Weiss says you can also, just like by Tchumin we learned quite a few times, when you make a tchum of a city, you always square it out. You draw a square. Now that adds a lot more than the last house, especially if you're going from one edge or one corner.
Because the tchum gets squared off.
Exactly. So not everyone agrees with that, but Rav Asher Weiss says you also get 2,000 amos from the square, not just from the last house. So that's also a big machlokas. Then also, do you measure straight horizontally, as if you can fly above the air, or do you, like as a straight line? Or do you measure going up and down the hills? So every time you have to go up and down the hills of Yerushalayim in that area, or where we live here, so then that's going to add a tremendous amount of extra mileage or amos. So that's another factor that just weighs into the entire equation. Another issue is when we say the mill, 2,000 amos, does that go by which 2,000 amos? So usually you paskin like Orach Chaim Nah, but some say no, you go by the Chazon Ish. So it could be 960 meters versus, I think Rav Asher Weiss, I didn't do the calculation myself, but I heard him say, I think around 1,200. But it might be more, might be a lot more. Whatever it is, that's, so let's say 1,200 versus 960. That's what I think I heard. But whatever it is. So it makes another big difference. Also, another difference, do you go by measuring just by meters, or do you go by, when we say a mil, maybe you go by driving distance? So the Kaf HaChaim is Megillah, he says you go by driving distance, which means an 18-minute drive. But most poskim, I believe, say you go by physical land. I mean, we're talking about cities. It has to be Samach Venira, and it's not an issue of traveling. So that's another issue. One more major issue. When we say it's visible, do you have to see just one edge of the city to the other edge of the city? Or does it mean you have to see the entire city? And that's another major machlokas in the poskim. So all these different factors make a big difference on the psak when it comes to Ramot and Mevaseret. Also, what's interesting, Ramot, it seems that all originally, when Ramot was started, it seems like most of the main poskim all said it is only Yadalid. Why? Because first of all, it's also more than a meal, and many of the posts, and there was no continuous eruv, and it was more than a meal distance for sure, and that's what most of the poskim went by, and such as Minchas Yitzchak, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, the Chazon Ish, and others. And then also, another main consideration was that a lot of the poskim, Rav Tukachinsky, they measured from 2,000 amos from the walled city. But either way, it made no difference because it was still more than a meal at that time. Nowadays, it's, again, it depends how you measure it, but I know Rav Asher Weiss is assuming nowadays we're less than a meal. Chazon Ovadia in Yabia Omer, he writes, which was generally the psak for all Sfardim until recently, you only keep Yadalid. And that's because in his whole tshuva, he had a number of these sveikos.
In Mevaseret and Ramot.
So that's interesting. Originally, Yabia Omer wrote that for Ramot, you keep only Yadalid, because it was for sure more than a meal. Okay. That's his assumption, plus all the other sveikos that we're dealing with. And then when it came to Mevaseret, so that's historically when the Mevaseret was started some maybe 50 years ago. So the Rav Harashi of Mevaseret, he was Rav Mordechai Chaziza, and he spoke to Rav Elyashiv, Rav Vad Yosef, and Rav Masas, and also with Rav Uri Cohen, who's the main Rosh Kollel, living in Mevaseret, or learning there. And at the time, for like 40 years, the psak for all of Mevaseret, and everybody kept it, was Tedvav. Nowadays, most, from what I hear from Rav Isaacson, my neighbor who's a Rebbe there, the vast majority, if not everyone, holds of Yadalid. And a lot of that changed several years ago when they had a new Rav Ir. Shlomo, what's his name? I had it written down. Rav Shlomo Ben Ezra. So he became the new Rav Ir. And based on the psak of Rav Avadia, because later he kind of reversed his psak, and basically, so now, since it's more than a mil away, even though you could see it, but it's, again, when we learned in the Shulchan Aruch, there's a major machlokus in the poskim how to understand samuch has to be within 2,000 amos, and it's not. But is it near so it's a major machlokus if a nira has to be within 2,000 amos, or just as long as you can possibly see it with the naked eye.
So he's going with the thing.
So he's right.
It's the distance, and it's not nira. And
exactly. But even nira needs 2,000 amos.
And he reversed the
right, and it's a different municipality. So even Rav Shlomo Zalman would say you need to read it on Yudalid, and that's the general psak by the vast majority of everybody nowadays living in Mevaseret. So it totally flipped on both cities, real reversal. I think that mostly summarizes the main points. Now what happened recently, maybe within the past 5-10 years, there's been a major debate by the Sephardic poskim, because it's, so the question is it more, Lamaisa, physically, is it more than 1,000 amos or not? That's one issue. And Rabbi Omer already has his psak, or Rav Ovadia, that Ramot, a mil, 2,000 amos. Yeah. So 1 mil, 2,000 amos. So the psak was clearly that for Sephardim, and that until recently. So first, almost everybody, I believe, kept only Yudalid and Ramot. Until about 5-10 years ago, the vast majority of Ramot was split. Ashkenazim and Teimanim only kept Lamaisa, they only kept Tedvav. Again, you could be Machmer, but that's what they held. And still, most of the Sephardim, because of Rav Ovadia, and basically most of the Sephardic poskim, maybe not Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, because he says you go by the municipality as well, like Shlomo Zalman. At least that's how he's quoted. So, but anyways, many of the Sephardim poskim, but then about 5-10 years ago, they started creating. Now it might be even better, but they started creating little huts every 70 amos, every 35 meters. Started out as little wooden huts or little metal huts that were. So the question was that livable? So Rav Shlomo Amar, the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim at the time, and anyway, so he was very much against changing the original psak, and that he's saying you can't even live there. You're gonna burn up if you try and sleep in there. It's too hot. There's no air conditioning. It's even a question: was it 4 amos by 4 amos? Anyways. It's a little bit of a discussion of Metzius, and things obviously evolved. But Rav, I think it's about 5 years ago, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, right, the son of Rav Ovadia, the Rishon LeZion, the current Rishon LeZion. So he put out letters and psakim that nowadays even his father would agree with these new huts that it is that even all Sephardim should keep only Tet Vav. So I'm not 100% sure if all the Sephardim crossed over or not, but it's an evolving thing. And I just want to point out, so Rav Asher Weiss, he also pointed out that he also holds that, all these technicalities, but you also have to look at it. Does it look like it's part of one city or not part of one city? Ooh. Okay. Anyway, so you have to look at it. Is it physically look like one city or not? And you don't necessarily factor all the exact same factors that used to be.
Use the drone.
Trying to think what he pointed out. Anyway, so Rav Asher Weiss and Lamaisa, he paskins for he's a Rav, one of the main Rabbanim who live in Ramot, and he paskins that you definitely do keep only Tet Vav, and that's his psak. And I just wanted to add, I haven't seen anyone speak about it, but there's also the issue of Safek Darabanan Lakula. And even though we say bracha Safek, we say Lakula, that you don't say a bracha, we're talking about the holiday first. So it's a big issue of, do you look at it, Ramot, Lamaisa feels and behaves like Yerushalayim, just like Har Nof, for the most part, especially for those who live there. And it's the same area, it's very close, and there's issues of lotit go to do, and as the poskim point out, there's a famous midrash in the Yalkut and Yeshayahu that Yerushalayim is going to grow and reach all the way to Damascus. So as Yerushalayim, evolves over the years and gets bigger and bigger, everything gets closer and closer. So just you're figuring all the factors, all together. That so anyway, so some have the opinion of you go 1,000,000 sveikos, you go.
And that was from Asher Weiss that said that based off of the midrash, or that was
the midrash. Everybody quotes that midrash.
Did Rav Asher incorporate that in his stock, or
I don't know. I added the part about Sefek Darabanan L'Kula. That was my little thing.
Well, you can't do a Sefek Darabanan L'Kula on Purim, because then you'd have no Purim.
No, in other words, you have to pick a day. Which day? And it's just, everyone says you don't want to have one city where half the people are doing one way and half the people are doing the other. That everybody agrees. And that's Lamaisa what's going on. And everyone says even Yerushalayim, even if you would end off really by the walls of the original city, everybody agrees, but you can't stop in the middle of Yerushalayim. Anyway, and just, it would make sense that could be a factor. I think that pretty much exhausts that, and I think that pretty much does that. Fine. So
watch your time. Okay.
How much more minutes do I have?
You're in 16 and a half minutes.
16 and a half. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Okay. Go. So I have 10 more minutes or less. Okay. So let's read inside now. Let's finish this siman. Hey, we're at Hey today. Ben Ir Shahalach Likrach. Now, if you have someone who lives in a city and he goes to a walled city, Ben Krach Shahalach Le'ir, or someone who lives in a walled city like Yerushalayim and now goes to a city that's not, let's say Beit Shemesh. So, it depends. Im hayadaito lachzor limkomo. Now, just to point out, as a short background, it happens to be a machloket rishonim if you go by das or not. Do you go by where you physically are, or do you go by when you leave your city, you live there, you know, right? You know where you live. When you leave there to travel to the other city, it all depends on when you leave your city, what was your intention? Were you intending to come back by the morning, or were you intending, it all goes by what your intention was for Amud HaShachar. That's the pshat that we see according to the perhaps the Shulchan Aruch, that Mishnah Berurah says that clearly, that we go by Amud HaShachar. Again, there is also an issue if you go by Tseis versus Amud HaShachar. Most poskim go by Amud HaShachar as the main point. The Chazon Ish, we'll see, when it's a secondary place, then he goes after the nighttime. We'll explain that in a moment. Okay. Another machlokas Rishonim. So the shittas of Rashi, many Rishonim, and clearly from the Yerushalmi, you define it by where you are or where you plan to be, both individually, both for Yud and both for Tet Vav. Which means, according to the Yerushalmi, you could hold of 2 days of Purim. You can michayev with a bracha for 2 days of Purim, both Yud and both Shushan Purim. That's only according to the Yerushalmi, and if you hold like Rashi that it's based on your das of where you plan to be at Amud HaShachar for both Yud and Tet Vav. However, according to the Rosh, he does not follow this Yerushalmi halacha, and he says it completely depends on where you are on Yud Daled. And Yud Daled is Koveya. Wherever you are on Yud Daled, then that defines where you have to keep. If you're on a walled city on Yud Daled, then you're going to keep Tet Vav. It doesn't matter where you are, and vice versa. If you live in a vice versa. Doesn't matter where. It only matters where you are on Yud Daled, or maybe your kavana. It's either your kavana or where you are.
And if you leave and you go someplace else where it's not a walled city, you still have to keep it on.
It only depends where you are on Yud Daled. Yud Daled. According to the Rosh, it only depends where you are on Yud Daled. I'm not 100% sure. If we have to look at the Rosh inside because of all the different nuances. There's Das, there's Amud HaShachar versus Seis, and But the main point of the Rosh is that you could only be chayav one day. And that it doesn't matter, it doesn't, Tedvav is not Kuveya. Those are the two main points that we see of the Rosh. So some people are choshesh for that halacha. For example, generally, so we see from the Mishnah Berurah, it seems like you could be chayav 2 days with the bracha, and that is the general psak for Ashkenazim. Most Ashkenazim say you could be chayav 2 days with the bracha, although some of the Poskei Ashkenaz say you should be machmer on Tedvav, to listen to that you're chayav, but listen to somebody else say the bracha for you, because you're not. It's a suffix for you if you can say the bracha twice. So listen to somebody else. And many of the Sfardim, they paskin that you only could be, and that's what Chazon Ovadia writes, only say one, you could only say the bracha once, and you're only chayav once. So if, but it's good to keep the second day. You have to keep the second day misafik, but it's asr to say on the second day a bracha. So the truth is, the halacha, basically everyone agrees, if you make yourself chayav both days, which we'll get to shortly, then you are chayav both days. The machlokas is if you're allowed to say the bracha on the second day, because according to the Rosh, you are already yotzei. And we also learned, I think we learned this, we mentioned it yesterday, that it's based on the Yerushalmi and the Gra, and that's Mishnah Berurah Paskins, as well as many, that even a person who's a ben krach, and he's chayav on tet vav, if he listens to the Megillah on Yud Daled, you were yotzei already. Right? Because it says, l'rov ha'olam.
From Yud Daled.
You might not be yotzei. That's a suffix for yotzei. If you're a kfar, which we don't have nowadays, then yes, you're yotzei. And if you're not in the city, if you're in a kfar and you're read on Yud Aleph, and the Gemara and the Tosfos says, I think it's Gemara Befeush, Daf Yutet, if you're a ben kfar and now you're in a city on Yud Daled, you're mamish chayav again on Yud Daled. So, but anyways, it points out that even if you're a ben krach and you heard it on Yud Daled, you were yotzei 100%. So that's a machlokas. You were yotzei 100%, and now you can't say a bracha again on Tedvav, or if you could say a bracha again on Tedvav. So that exactly is part of this whole machlokas. So, okay. I think that is good enough background. So let's read again inside, and we'll make sure we follow. So again, a person goes from one city to another city, right? One type of city to a different type of city. So it goes like this. Im hayadaita lachzor limkomo. Person has a mind to go back to his place. Bizman kriya, when they're going to read the kriya, right, on the day. V'nit'ake v'lo chazar. But you get stuck. Kore kimikomo. You read like your place. In other words, let's say I live in Beit Shemesh, and I'm planning, and I go visit Yerushalayim on, on Yud Erev. I'm going for a couple days, or going for a day. I'm going before Purim, and I'm planning to come back to Beit Shemesh before Amud Shachar on Yud Daled. Right? We're going on the assumption that we hold it goes by Amud Shachar. That's what most poskim hold. So I go to Yerushalayim, let's say, on Yud Daled at nighttime. I want to go see some friends on Yud Daled at nighttime.
You heard the Megillah already?
It doesn't matter. I'm planning to come back to Beit Shemesh before Amud Shachar. So since that's my plan, I have to read the Megillah on Yud Daled at night. It doesn't matter where I'm physically located, and it doesn't matter if it's the beginning of the night or the end of the night. Obviously, it's Zrizim Magdimin, and we don't wait till after Chatzos. But bottom line, the halacha is, I'm planning to come back, when I leave Beit Shemesh, I get on my car, or I get on the bus, and I'm going to Yerushalayim, I'm planning to come back before Amud Shachar, the halacha is you read like you're in Beit Shemesh. The halacha is of Beit Shemesh. And so therefore, even if I get stuck in Yerushalayim to the morning, the sun rose, you still Korei Kimakomo. I still have to read on Yudalid, the night of Yudalid and the morning of Yudalid. But if I only plan to return after the Zman Kriya, which is we're assuming is Amud Shachar, I plan to sleep in Yerushalayim until the morning and then come back to Beit Shemesh in the morning. So then, so then since I'm in Yerushalayim, since I plan to be in Yerushalayim through Amud Shachar, then that's how I read, like the people who live in Yerushalayim, and I have to keep Tedvav. Yes, and the poskim point out that both, you could be chayev based on what we hold the halacha, that's the Shulchan Aruch, that's based on Shitas Rashi, what we hold, and based on Yerushalmi, that we, and other Rishonim of course, you could be chayev 2 days, or you could be pater 2 days, completely, and miss out. And everyone, so Lamaisa, you could be pater both, and everyone says that's a horrible thing to do. You don't want to get yourself out of not doing the mitzvah Purim and not doing Persumei Nisa. And the same thing goes in the exact reverse for a Ben Eretz, for someone who lives in Yerushalayim and wants to go to Yudalid. So then it's important that you are, if a person lives in Yerushalayim and he comes to Beit Shemesh and he plans to be in Beit Shemesh on Yudalid during Amud Shachar, so also he would be chayev to keep, if he is, so then he would be chayev to keep like those in Beit Shemesh and have to read it then, right?
It's possible he will not have heard the reading the night before.
Well, if you know you're going to be in Beit Shemesh in the morning at Amud Shachar, when you leave Yerushalayim, make sure to read it. You could even read it in Yerushalayim with the bracha, because that's your intention. Now, right, so I'm saying that, but you have the opposite is right. It depends on the case, exactly. If you have intent, if you're in Yerushalayim and you plan to return to Yerushalayim before Amud Shachar, then you for sure don't read anything in Yudalid. But if you plan to stay in Yudalid through Amud Shachar, then you do have to keep like a Ben Ir, like Yudalid.
So then, if he winds up staying, according to what it says in Shulchan Aruch, he winds up staying in Beit Shemesh.
So it doesn't matter what you wind up doing. It doesn't matter what you wind up doing. It matters what your das was. That's Kovei Adalacha. Right.
Right. So then, if he winds up staying in Beit Shemesh, he actually reads on the 15th in Beit Shemesh. Is that
correct? So if a person in Yerushalayim plans to go back to Yerushalayim and he changes his mind, then he's chayav like Yerushalayim. Right? As it goes by, your das. Now there's two caveats I'll just throw out there to confuse us all. Chazon Ish points out if it's your secondary place, then you need to be there during Seis. In other words, if you live in Yerushalayim and you want to be chayav in Beit Shemesh, you do need to go, it does go by your das in the morning, but you also have to physically be in Beit Shemesh when Seis happens, because it's your secondary place. But if you want, when you go back to Yerushalayim, let's say you keep Yudalit and you want to also keep Tedvav, so you have to be in Yerushalayim in the morning, or plan to be there in the morning, but you don't have to get back in time before it says to Yerushalayim, even according to the Chazon Ish, because he holds it, you keep Seis, I believe that's what he holds, it's only by the secondary place. So I think Lamaisa, we don't hold to the Chazon Ish, we just go by the morning, but for those who want to be machmer like the Chazon Ish, then that's something to keep in mind. And one other caveat, the Taz, and I think the Mishnah Berurah holds of it lahalacha, was, let's say I plan, I live in Yerushalayim, and I plan, or it could be either way, but I plan to go to Yudalit, and I plan to be there through the morning. So normally we could say it goes by your das, but if the end of the day you physically return before Alos HaShachar, that case is not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. It's like an added thing. It's like you plan to be in Yudalid, so you should be reading and being chayav in Yudalid, but at the end of the day, you went back in the middle of the night and you weren't even there in Yudalid, then you would not be chayav in Yudalid, you'd only be chayav like Tetvav. So that's a machlok at poskim, but that is the psak of the Taz and the Mishnah Berurah. Okay. I think, now obviously it's a little complicated, a lot of nuances, and depending on which direction you're going, but I think we went over time. Let me just read the Ramah and we'll be done. Haga, v'im hu b'midbar o b'asfina. Now, let's say you're traveling. You're not in any city. It doesn't matter where you normally live. Now you're traveling. You're on you're on a plane. You're on a boat. You're you're in the wilderness. And so you're no longer attached. You're not living in either city right now. Kore b'yom yudalid kamo rova olam. So since you're not in, let's say, Yerushalayim, you're going to only chayev on one day Yudalid, and that's Rova Olam. And many say you're only, and as we mentioned before, we also mentioned that even if you're in even if you hold of Tetvav Lahalacha, you were at least Yotze, even if you're in Yudalid. But without even going there, that is the halacha. If you're traveling, you keep Yudalid. But what many poskim point out, and that's why sometimes you're playing with fire to keep Tetvav only. And that's why some of the poskim are reluctant, because they point out that if you're only chayav on Yudalid and you read it on Tetvav, so most poskim say it's a bracha lavatala and you are not even yotze. You could be yotze from Tetvav to Yudalid, but you can't be yotze from Yudalid to Tetvav. Because Yudalid is Rova Olam and Tetvav is only for those in Shushan Purim. Okay.
Yeah. Were you able to clarify the issue of what defines a city, how many homes, and what defines a wall?
Let me turn this off. Hope it wasn't too convoluted today.